Hi, and welcome to the Authors Lighthouse Podcast, helping writers and emerging authors navigate the choppy waters of publishing. I'm your host, Karen Schober, indie author and author consultant. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Authors Lighthouse Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about story beats. In the world of storytelling, story beats are the fundamental building blocks that create a narrative. They are the points in a story that define the key moments of tension, character development, and plot progression. Understanding story beats is crucial for new authors who want to create engaging stories that will capture the attention of readers. Story beats help to create a structure that makes it easier to develop characters, build tension, and create a satisfying resolution. The importance of story beats lies in their ability to create a sense of progression and momentum within a story. They help to maintain the reader's interest and keep them interested and invested in the story's outcome. Without effective story beats, a story can feel flat, unengaging, or directionless. By learning about different story beats and how to craft them effectively, new authors can create stories that are more engaging, memorable, and emotionally resonant. Using well-crafted story beats can also help to differentiate a story from others in its genre and make it stand out in a crowded marketplace of books and other media. So if you're a newer author looking to create engaging and memorable stories, stay tuned for the rest of the podcast because we're going to dive deep into the world of story beats and how to use them effectively. So let's start out first. What is a story beat? A story beat or story beats are the key moments in a story that define the critical turning points in the narrative. They are the milestones that the characters must pass through to achieve their goal or resolve their central conflict of the story. Story beats can be thought of as major events in the story that shape the character and the plot. The significance of story beats in storytelling cannot be overstated. Story beats help to create a structure that gives the story momentum and direction. They help to create a sense of progression and build tension as the story moves forward its climax. Story beats also help to create a sense of stakes for the character, as the outcome of each beat has consequences that affect the story's resolution. A typical story has a set of story beats that serve as the foundation for the narrative. The first story beat is the enticing incident, which is the event that just sets the story in motion. The enticing incident disrupts the protagonist's world and forces them to take action to resolve the conflict that arises from it. The inciting incident is the catalyst that propels the story forward and sets the stage for the rest of the story beats. As the story progresses, the protagonist will encounter other story beats that shape the narrative. These beats can include plot points, which are the critical moments that define the story's direction, and the midpoint, which is when the protagonist is at the lowest point in the story. One of the most significant story beats is the climax, which is when the protagonist confronts the central conflict of the story. The climax is the point when the stakes are at its highest and the protagonist must overcome their greatest challenge to achieve the goal. The climax is also when the story's resolution is determined and the consequences of the protagonist's actions are revealed. The significance of story beats are not just limited to the narrative structure of the story. Story beats can also shape the characters, providing opportunities for character development and growth. As the characters face each beat, they are forced to confront their weaknesses, make difficult decisions, and overcome their flaws. This character development creates a sense of emotional resonance that can draw the reader into the story and make them invested or more invested in the outcome. Story beats are the foundation of a compelling story. They create a structure that gives the story the momentum, direction, and tension, and they shape the characters, providing opportunities for growth and emotional resonance. Understanding story beats and how to craft them effectively is crucial for authors who want to create an engaging and memorable stories that resonate with their readers. So, story beats are essentially the building blocks of the story. They're the foundation in which the entire narrative is built upon. Without story beats, a story can feel disjointed, directionless, and the lack of necessary tension and conflict to engage readers. At the core, story beats are the moments in the story where there's something significant. These moments can include key events, turning points, or plot twists that shape the narrative and move the story forward. Each beat serves as a specific purpose in the story, whether it is to create tension, develop characters, or resolve conflict. Story beats also provide a structure that helps the author create a cohesive narrative. By defining the key moments in the story, the author can develop a roadmap that guides the narrative's direction and ensures that each scene has a clear purpose in the overall story. Besides providing structure, story beats can also create tension and conflict that keeps readers engaged. When used effectively, story beats can create a sense of anticipation and build momentum as the story moves towards its climax. By creating tension throughout each beat, authors can keep readers invested in the stories and eager to see what happens next. Story beats also provide opportunities for character development. As characters face each beat, they are forced to confront their flaws, make different decisions and difficult decisions, and grow as individuals. The character development not only adds depth to the story's characters, but also creates an emotional connection with the reader who can relate to the character's struggles. And finally, the story beat provides a framework for resolution. Each beat creates a specific consequence or outcome that affects the story's resolution. By understanding the role of each beat and how they contribute to the story, the author can craft a satisfying conclusion that ties up loose ends and leaves the reader feeling fulfilled. So here are some examples of common story beats found in very popular stories. So the inciting incident, the moment that sets the story into motion and hooks the reader. In Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games, the enticing incident is when Katniss volunteers to take her sister's place in the games. You can have the call to adventure, when the protagonist is presented with a challenge they cannot ignore. In Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, the call to action is when Robert Langdon is asked to help solve a murder in the Louvre. The first plot point, the point when the protagonist makes a commitment to the story's central conflict. In Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, the first plot point is when Amy Dunn goes missing and her husband becomes the prime suspect. Now we have the midpoint. This is when the protagonist faces a significant setback and must reassess their goals. In Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, the midpoint is when Santiago's catch is eaten by sharks, forcing him to return to shore empty-handed. The third plot point, when the protagonist faces their greatest challenge and must overcome it to reach their goal. In Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, the third plot point is when Offred risks everything to escape with Gilead. Climax, the point of the story's central conflict reaches its peak and the protagonist must make a final decision. In Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, the climax is when Atticus Finch defends Tom Robinson in court. And the resolution. This is when the story's conflict is resolved and all the loose ends are tied up. In Khalid Hossein's The Kite Runner, the resolution when Amir rescues his nephew and finally finds redemption. So story beats are an essential in creating an engaging and coherent narrative. By utilizing these common beats, authors can create a framework that keeps readers engaged and invested in the story. Whether it's a thriller, romance, or a coming-of-age tale, these beats provide the needed structure to create a compelling story. So now we're going to go into the types of story beats. And remember, these are the key moments in the story that drive the narrative forward and keep readers engaged. They provide the structure and momentum, creating a sense of tension and conflict that propels the story towards its resolution. Now we'll discuss the different story beats in depth and again provide some examples of popular books. So the inciting incident, the one that sets everything going and sets the protagonist on their journey. And it hooks the readers and draws them into the story from page 1. The inciting incident can take many forms, but it always creates a sense of conflict or tension that propels the story forward. Like in Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, it's when Amy Dunn disappears, setting her husband Nick on the path to clear his name and find out what happened to her. Plot points. Plot points are significant moments in the story that change the direction of the narrative. There can be more than one plot point, and they can be positive or negative. They are moments of decision and revelation that alter the protagonist's goals and motivations, and they always create a sense of tension or conflict. The first plot point is often when the protagonist comes to the story's central conflict. Not necessarily the beginning of the story, but when they come to the central conflict. The midpoint is when the protagonist faces a significant setback, all hope is lost, and has to reassess their goals. The third plot point is when the protagonist faces their greatest challenge and must overcome it to reach their goals. Like in Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins, the first plot point is when Rachel sees something suspicious on her train ride, setting her on the path to uncover the truth about a missing woman. The midpoint is when Rachel discovers a key piece of information that changes her understanding of the situation. And the third plot point is when she confronts the killer and risks her life to save the victim. The climax. The climax is the point of maximum tension in the story. It is when the protagonist confronts the central conflict of the story and must make a final decision that determines the story's resolution. The climax can take many forms, but always creates a sense of catharsis or release at the end. It can be a moment of triumph or defeat, but always marks the end of the story's central conflict. Like in Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, the climax is when Katniss and Peeta are the last two tributes standing and face the choice to either kill each other or defy the Capitol by threatening to commit suicide together. These story beats can be found in a wide variety of styles and genres, from mysteries to thrillers to romance and fantasy. By utilizing these beats, writers have the framework that keeps readers engaged and invested in the story. They can also use the beats to create a sense of pacing and momentum that propels the story forward and keeps the readers turning the pages. It is important to note that these beats are not the only elements that make up a good story. Characters, settings, dialogue are also essential components of an interesting narrative. However, by using these story beats as a foundation, writers can create a coherent and engaging story that keeps readers hooked from beginning to end. And by using the inciting incident, plot point, and climax, writers can create a framework that keeps readers invested in the story and propels the narrative forward. These beats can be found in a wide variety of styles and genres and provide the structure that helps keep the writer creating a compelling and memorable story. So now that we know what story beats are and how they help move the narrative forward, let's dive deeper into each kind of story beat and examine how they affect the protagonist and the story. So first, the enticing incident. Remember, this is the one that sets everything in motion and creates that central conflict. This beat is crucial as it hooks the reader and draws them into the story. They need to know what's going to happen next. The enticing incident can take many forms, but it always creates a sense of conflict or tension that propels the story forward. This conflict can be internal or external to the protagonist. So let's go back to The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. So we've already determined that the enticing incident is when Katniss volunteers as tribute to save her younger sister Prim from being sent to the Hunger Games. This moment sets the story in motion and creates the central conflict of the story. It forces Katniss to leave her home and face the brutality of the Capitol and the games, sending her on the journey that will ultimately change her life. In The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, the inciting incident is when Robert Langdon is called to the Louvre to investigate the murder of the curator. This moment sets the story in motion and creates the central conflict of the story. It forces Langdon to work with Sophie Neveu to uncover the truth behind the murder and the conspiracy that lies at the heart of the story. So now plot points. The plot points are significant moments in the story that change the direction of the narrative. They are moments of decision or revelation that alter the protagonist's goals and motivations. They can be positive or negative, and they always create a sense of tension and conflict. So remember, the first plot point is often when the protagonist commits to the story's central conflict. It's when they decide to take action or forced to take action and pursue the goal. So back to the Hunger Games. The first plot point is when Katniss and Peeta are chosen as District 12's tributes and sent to the Capitol to compete in the Hunger Games. This moment forces Katniss to commit to the central conflict of the story and sets her on the path that changes her life and actually the entire country's life by the end of the series of books. In The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson, the first plot point is when Mikhail Blomkvist is hired by Heinrich Wagner to investigate the disappearance of his niece Harriet. This moment forces Blomkvist to commit the central conflict of the story and sets him on the path that will ultimately lead him to uncovering the truth behind Harriet's disappearance. The midpoint is when the protagonist faces a significant setback and reassesses their goals. It is when the story takes a turn and the protagonist must confront a new challenge or obstacle. So in The Hunger Games, the midpoint is when Katniss and Peeta realize that they are being played against each other and must fight to the death to win the games. This moment forces Katniss to reassess her goals and motivations and forces her to confront the reality of the games. In Girl on the Train, the midpoint is when Rachel discovers that she was blackout drunk the night of the murder and may have been involved. This moment forces Rachel to reassess her memories and confront her own involvement in the central conflict of the story. The third plot point is when the protagonist faces the greatest challenge and must overcome it to reach their goal. It is the moment of highest tension in the story and the last hurdle that the protagonist must overcome. So in The Hunger Games, the third plot point is when Katniss and Peeta are the last two tributes standing and must either kill each other or defy the Capitol by threatening to commit suicide together. This moment forces Katniss to confront her values and make a decision that will ultimately challenge the course of the story. And in Gone Girl, The third plot point is when Nick discovers Amy is alive, spoiler alert, and has framed him for her disappearance. This moment forces Nick to confront his own mistakes by taking action to clear his name and expose Amy's deception. And the climax. The climax is the moment of the highest tension in the story, and the point in the central conflict must be resolved. It is when the protagonist must face their greatest challenge and make a decision that will ultimately determine the outcome of the story. So back to the Hunger Games. The climax is when Katniss and Peeta threaten to commit suicide together. So they've been faced with the challenge, and now they've made a decision of what to do. They've decided to commit suicide together, forcing the Capitol to instantly change the rules of the game and declare them both winners. This moment resolves the central conflict of the story and sets Katniss on a new path. In The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the climax is when Blomkvist and Lisbeth confront Martin Wagner and uncover the truth behind Harriet's disappearance. This is their central conflict. They resolve the central conflict of the story and set the characters on a new path. Each type of story beat has its unique role in moving the story forward and affecting the protagonist's journey. This enticing incident creates the central conflicts and draws the readers into the story. The plot points change the direction of the narrative and forces the protagonist to confront new challenges and obstacles. And the climax resolves it all of the central conflict and sets the protagonists on a new path. By understanding these story beats and how they affect the narrative, new authors can create interesting stories and keep their readers hooked to the very end. So how do you create an effective story beat? Creating and crafting effective story beats is essential to creating a compelling story that keeps readers engaged from beginning to end. So here's some quick tips of a few ways to create effective story beats. First of all, start with a strong inciting incident. An inciting incident is that event, that catalyst that sets the story in motion and creates the conflict. It should be a strong, memorable event that captures the reader's attention and draws them into the story. Make sure your enticing incident is clear, concise, and sets up the story in a way that is both intriguing and meaningful. Use those plot points to change the direction of the narrative. Plot points are key moments in the story that change the direction of the narrative and forces the protagonist to confront the new challenges and obstacles. To create an effective plot point, think about what the protagonist wants and what obstacles are standing in their way. Then create a turning point that forces the protagonist to change their approach and take a new path. Build tension leading up to the climax. The climax is the moment of highest tension in the story and should be built up gradually throughout the narrative. The use of foreshadowing, symbolism, and other literary devices to create a sense of anticipation and keep readers engaged throughout this process. Make sure that the protagonist is actively involved in each story beat. The protagonist should be an active participant in each story beat, driving the action forward and making decisions that impact the narrative. Avoid making a protagonist that is a passive observer or bystander and making them an integral part of the story. Use each story beat to develop the protagonist. Each story beat should contribute to the development of the protagonist, helping them grow and change over the course of the narrative. Think about how each beat affects the protagonist and use it as an opportunity to explore their character and motivations. Make sure that each story beat is essential to the narrative. Each beat should serve as a specific purpose in the narrative, advancing the story and developing characters. Avoid using beats that feel unnecessary or don't add to the overall story. Create a strong resolution. The resolution is that final beat of the story, and it should provide a satisfying conclusion to the narrative. Make sure the resolution resolves the central conflict and ties up any loose ends in a way that feels satisfying and meaningful. By following these tips, authors can create an effective story beat that keeps readers engaged and invested in the narrative. Remember, each story beat should serve a specific purpose in the narrative, advance the story, and develop the characters in a way that is both meaningful and interesting. Creating tension and conflict in the story beats is essential to creating a compelling narrative that keeps readers engaged from beginning to end. Without tension and conflict, a story can fall flat and fail to capture the reader's attention. Tension and conflict create a sense of stakes and urgency in the story, making the reader invested in the outcome and rooting for the protagonist to succeed or fail. When the protagonist faces obstacles and challenges, readers are more likely to become emotionally invested in the story and care about the outcome. Conflict can take many forms in a story, from external conflicts between characters or forces to internal conflicts within the protagonist. Internal conflicts can be especially powerful as they force the protagonist to confront their own flaws and limitations and grow as a character over the course of the story. Creating tension and conflict in the story beats can also help keep the story moving forward, providing a sense of momentum and urgency that propels the narrative forward. When the protagonist faces obstacles and challenges, they must take action to overcome them, driving the story forward and leading to a new and unexpected developments. To create effective tension and conflict in story beats, it is important to think about what is at stake for the protagonist and what obstacles are standing in their way. Consider the protagonist's goals and motivations and what they stand to lose if they cannot achieve them. Then create obstacles that challenge the protagonist and force them to confront their limitations and weaknesses. It is also important to balance tension and conflict with moments of relief and resolution. Too much tension and conflict can cause for exhausting the reader and may even lead them to disengaging from the story. It is important to give moments of relief and resolution, allowing protagonists and the reader to catch their breath and reflect on the events of the story. One way to create effective tension and conflict in the story beats is to use the yes but / no and approach. This approach, the protagonist faces a challenge or obstacle and must take action to overcome it. The first attempt may be successful, creating a moment of relief for the protagonist and the reader. However, the success is short-lived, and a new obstacle arises, forcing the protagonist to take action once again. By using this approach, tension and conflict are created in a natural and organic way, and the protagonist faces one challenge after another, leading to a sense of momentum and urgency that propels the story forward. Creating tension and conflict in the story beats is essential to crafting a compelling narrative that keeps readers engaged from beginning to end. By creating obstacles and challenges that challenge the protagonist and force them to confront their limitations, authors can create a state of urgency and keeps the story moving forward. The reader is invested in the outcome as well. Balancing tension and conflict with moments of relief and resolution are also important, allowing the protagonist and the reader to catch their breath and reflect on the events of the story. The story beats can be a powerful tool is foreshadowing events and revealing character traits in a narrative. By strategically placing certain beats in the story, the author can hint at future events or provide insight into the characters' personalities and motivations. Foreshadowing is a technique where the author hints at future events or outcomes in the story. Story beats can effectively foreshadow events, creating a sense of anticipation and suspense in the reader. For example, in The Hunger Games, the first plot point when Katniss volunteers to take her younger sister's place in the Hunger Games. This beat sets the stage for the rest of the story, foreshadowing the danger and violence that Katniss will face in the games. Foreshadowing can also create a sense of mystery or intrigue in the story. By hinting at future events without revealing too much, an author can keep the reader guessing and engaged. For example, in Gone Girl, the enticing incident occurs when Amy Dunn disappears on her 5th wedding anniversary. This beat sets up the mystery at heart of the story, foreshadowing the twists and turns that will unfold as the truth about Amy's disappearance is revealed. Story beats can also reveal character traits and motivations. By showing how a character reacts to certain situations or challenges, an author can provide insight into their personality and behavior. For example, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, the enticing incident occurs when Nick Carraway moves to New York and becomes involved with the wealthy and glamorous Jay Gatsby. This beat sets up the conflict between Gatsby's desire for love and acceptance and his inability to escape his past, revealing his complex and flawed personality. Characterization can also be achieved through the use of internal story beats, such as moments of reflection or decision-making. These beats provide a window into a character's thoughts and emotions, allowing the reader to understand their motivations and desires. For example, in To Kill a Mockingbird, the climax occurs when Atticus Finch defends Tom Robinson in court, despite the racial prejudices of the town. This beat reveals Atticus's strong sense of justice and morality, as well as his willingness to stand up for what he believes in, even in the face of opposition. Story beats can foreshadow events and reveal character traits in a narrative. By strategically placing certain beats in the story, an author can create a sense of anticipation and suspense, as well as provide insight into the character's personality and motivations. Whether it's through internal or external beats, the author can use these techniques to engage the reader and bring their story to life. Common mistakes to avoid. Story beats are essential elements of a narrative that help move the story forward and keep the reader engaged. However, crafting effective story beats can be challenging for new authors. So let's look into some common mistakes and how to avoid them. Lack of clarity. One of the most common mistakes of new authors is when crafting story beats, they lack clarity. These beats should be clear and concise so the reader understands right away what's happening with the story. Avoid using vague or confusing language that can confuse the reader and disrupt the flow of the story. Poor pacing. Pacing is an essential element of storytelling. Poor pacing can cause a story to feel slow or rushed, making it a challenge to engage the reader. It is important to ensure that the story beats are evenly paced throughout the story, building up tension and suspense gradually. Rushing through critical beats can cause for an unsatisfactory resolution, while dragging on less essential beats that can make the story feel tedious. Unnecessary beats. Another common mistake is when authors are crafting story beats that include too many unnecessary beats. Including too many beats can overwhelm the reader and actually dilute the impact of the critical beats. It is crucial to focus on beats that are essential to the story's progression and eliminate those that are redundant or add little to the narrative. Lack of conflict. Conflict drives the story forward and keeps the reader engaged. A common mistake for new authors is to not include enough conflict in their story beats. It is essential to ensure that the beats contain sufficient conflict to create tension and keep that reader engaged. The conflict can be internal or external, but it must be present to create an interesting story. Over-reliance on cliches. Authors can also fall into the trap of using cliches or relying too heavily on tried and true formulas. While some elements of storytelling are universal, such as the hero's journey, it is crucial to avoid relying on cliches and creating predictable story beats. The story beats should be unique and unexpected, keeping the reader engaged. Inconsistent character development. Story beats are also crucial to character development. However, new authors can make the mistake of inconsistent character development. Characters should evolve and change throughout the story, responding to the challenges and conflicts they face. It is important to ensure that the story beats reflect the character's growth and development, creating a satisfying narrative arc. Lack of stakes. The stakes make the story meaningful to the reader. The story beat should contain high stakes that make the reader care about what happens next. The common mistakes newer authors make is not including high enough stakes in their story beats, resulting in a story that feels unimportant or uninteresting. Crafting effective story beats is an essential element in creating a compelling narrative. However, newer authors can make common mistakes when creating story beats, such as lack of clarity, poor pacing, unnecessary beats, lack of conflict, over-reliance on cliches, inconsistent character developments, and the lack of stakes. By avoiding these mistakes and focusing on creating unique, engaging story beats, newer authors can craft stories that captivate and entertain their readers. Story beats are the foundation of any compelling story. If the story beats are weak or poorly executed, the consequences can be detrimental to the overall narrative. So here are some examples of consequences of weak or poorly executed story beats. Lack of engagement. One of the most significant consequences of weak or poorly executed story beats is the lack of engagement from the reader. If the beats are not engaging or fail to create tension, the reader will lose interest in the story. Without engagement, the reader is likely to stop reading, resulting in a failed story. Predictability. Poorly executed story beats can lead to a predictable plot. If the story beats lack originality or fail to surprise the reader, the plot can become formulaic and predictable. This can be particularly frustrating for readers who expect to be surprised and intrigued by a story's twists and turns. Slow pace. Weak story beats can cause a slow-paced story. If the beats are not properly spaced out or lack tension, the narrative can drag, making it difficult for the reader to remain engaged. A slow pace can result in a story that feels overly long, again causing the reader to lose interest. Incoherent plot. The story beats are the building block of the story, and a weak or poorly executed beat can lead to an incoherent plot. If the beats are not adequately developed or don't fit together, the story can become confusing or disjointed. This can be particularly frustrating for readers who are trying to follow the narrative. Lack of emotional impact. Story beats can have a significant emotional impact on the reader. If the beats are weak or poorly executed, the emotional impact can be lost. This can cause a story that fails to resonate with the reader, making it difficult for them to connect with the character or care about their journey. Disappointing resolution. The resolution of a story is often the most critical beat. If the story beat leading up to the resolution is weak, the resolution can feel disappointing or unsatisfying. This can be particularly frustrating for readers who have invested time and energy in the story, only to be let down by the ending. Lack of character development. Story beats are also essential to character development. If the beats fail to adequately develop the character, they can become one-dimensional and uninteresting. This can cause the story that fails to engage the reader on an emotional level, making it difficult for them to care about the characters. Weak or poorly executed story beats can have several and severe consequences for the story. These consequences can include a lack of engagement from the reader, predictability, slow pacing, incoherent plot, lack of emotional impact, disappointing resolution, and the lack of character development. It is crucial for authors to ensure that their story beats are well crafted and engaging to create an interesting narrative that resonates with readers. Crafting effective story beats is essential for creating a compelling story. Avoid these mistakes that we discussed earlier, and here are a few tips on how to improve them. First of all, identify the key story beats. The first step in crafting an effective story beat is to, first of all, identify the key moments of the story. These are the critical turning points that propel the narrative forward. Make a list of these beats and ensure that they are well defined and have a clear purpose. Create tension and conflict. Tension and conflict are essential elements of effective story beats. Ensure that each beat creates tension and conflict, even if it is subtle. This will keep the reader engaged and invested in the story. Make the beats original. One of the most common mistakes new authors make is using predictable story beats. Try to avoid this by making your beats original and unexpected without using cliches. This will keep the reader guessing and add excitement to the narrative. The use of foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is an effective technique for creating tension and anticipation. Use foreshadowing to hint at future events and create a sense of mystery in your story. Use them like little breadcrumbs or planting seeds for the future events that will be coming. Develop your characters. Effective story beats are not just about plot. They also involve character development. Ensure that each beat is relevant to the characters and their journey. Use beats to reveal character traits, emotions, motivations, and flaws. Create a sense of urgency. Story beats should create an urgency and keep the reader invested in the story. Use pacing, timing, and dialogue to create a sense of urgency and momentum. Edit and revise. Crafting effective story beats takes time and effort. Edit and revise your story beats until they are well crafted, engaging, and serve the overall narrative. Seek feedback. Seek feedback from beta readers, critique partners, or writing groups. Their feedback can help you identify areas to improve and make your story beats more effective. And in general, just study the craft. Study the craft of storytelling. Read widely. Attend writing workshops and learn from other authors. By understanding the elements of effective storytelling, you can improve your story beats and create an interesting narrative. By avoiding the common mistakes new authors make when crafting story beats requires a deliberate approach. By identifying the key beats in your story, creating tension and conflict, making the beats original, using foreshadowing, developing your characters, creating a sense of urgency, editing and revising, seeking feedback, and studying the craft of storytelling, you can create an effective story beat that move the narrative forward and keep readers engaged. So today we discussed the importance of story beats in storytelling. Story beats are the building block of a story, and they drive the narrative forward, create tension and conflict, and momentum. We explored the different types of story beats that include the inciting incident, plot points, and the climax. Each of these beats serves a unique purpose in a story, and they have a significant impact in the protagonist's journey. We also discussed how story beats can be used to foreshadow events, reveal character traits, and create tension and conflict. By using these techniques effectively, writers can create engaging and compelling stories that keep readers interested. However, we also looked at the common mistakes new authors make when crafting story beats. These mistakes can lead to weak or poorly executed beats that fail to engage readers and move the story forward. To avoid these mistakes, we looked at a few tips on how to create effective story beats by including identifying the key beats in your story, creating tension and conflict, making the beats original, using foreshadowing, development of your character, creating a sense of urgency, editing and revising, seeking feedback, and studying the craft. As a writer, it is essential to understand the importance of story beats and how they affect the overall narrative. By applying what you have learned today, you can improve your storytelling skills and create interesting stories that captivate your readers. Remember, crafting effective story beats takes time and effort and requires a deliberate approach. Be patient and kind with yourself, and don't be afraid to seek feedback and revise your work until it is the best it can be. Story beats are a crucial element of storytelling. They keep the narrative moving forward and create tension and conflict that engages readers. By understanding the different story beats and how to craft them effectively, you can take your writing to the next level and create stories that captivate your readers. So keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep writing. The show is brought to you by my book, Hollywood Hearts, The Second Act, now up on Amazon and in Kindle Unlimited. Beth Edwards didn't think her book would be anything more than scribblings in a notebook. Never in her wildest dreams would she have thought that her book would become a blockbuster success and a Hollywood came calling. Life would never be the same for Beth and her young family as they headed to Hollywood to oversee production. Robert Cobb, the seasoned actor, had wanted to be involved in the project since he had seen Beth on TV promoting her book. He was amazed at who Beth was. As their characters fall for each other on the screen, they are both confused with what they are feeling off screen. Will true love happen when the director calls out, "Cut, that's a wrap"? If you like behind the scenes of Hollywood and the romance of meeting and falling for one of your TV crushes, Hollywood Hearts, The Second Act, a contemporary feel-good romance, will capture your heart. Find it on Amazon, a Kindle Unlimited exclusive. In news this week, Ally's survey shows indie authors growing stronger in the industry. This is awesome. Self-publishing has become an increasingly popular route for authors seeking to get their work out into the world. According to a recent survey by Ally, the Alliance of Independent Authors, which I am a member of, the trend towards self-publishing is only growing stronger. The survey found that self-published authors are making significant gains in terms of revenue and readership. In fact, 55% of self-published authors reported earning at least $1,000 from their writing in 2020, and 26% reported earning more than $10,000. These numbers are up significantly from previous years, showing that self-publishing is becoming a more viable career option for writers. One of the biggest benefits of self-publishing is the ability to maintain creative control over your work. Self-published authors are free to make their own decisions about cover design, pricing, and marketing strategies. This level of control can empower, especially writers who have struggled to find a traditional publisher willing to take a chance on their work. Another factor contributing to the growth of self-publishing is the rise of digital publishing platforms like Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing, or KDP. These platforms make it easy for authors to publish their work in a digital format, reaching readers all over the world with no traditional publishing contract. This has opened up new opportunities for writers who may have been shut out of the traditional publishing world. Of course, self-publishing isn't without its challenges. Authors must invest time and money into their marketing and promotion in order to get their works noticed. They must also be willing to take on the responsibilities of editing, formatting, and cover design themselves, or hire professionals for help. Despite these challenges, the survey results make it clear that self-publishing is a growing force in the publishing industry. For writers willing to put in the work and take control of their own careers, self-publishing can offer a path of success and even financial independence. I'm very excited about this. The word of the week, slush pile. The term slush pile refers to the stack of unsolicited manuscripts and pitches that an editor, publisher, or agent receives from aspiring writers. This pile can be overwhelming, with hundreds or even thousands of submissions to sift through. For writers, submitting to the slush pile can feel like tossing their work into a black hole, with little hope of ever being noticed. However, for editors, publishers, and agents, the slush pile is a crucial source for new talent and fresh ideas. While many submissions may be poorly written or off target for a particular publisher, there are always hidden gems waiting to be discovered. One of the biggest challenges of working with a slush pile is the sheer volume of submissions. It can be a daunting task to read through each manuscript and pitch, especially when many of them are clearly not a good fit for the publisher's list. However, editors, publishers, and agents know that the next great bestseller could be buried somewhere in that stack. So they approach each submission with an open mind and willingness to be surprised. For writers, submitting to the slush pile requires patience, persistence, and a thick skin. Rejection is a common occurrence, but it is important to remember that it is not reflection on the writer's worth or talent. With enough hard work and perseverance, even a slush pile submission can lead to a publishing deal and a successful career in the industry. And that is the slush pile. And now for my personal update. This week has been really productive. I'm still making progress on my cozy mystery. While the word count isn't where I want it to be, and I'm not exactly on schedule for Camp Nano, I am happy with what I've done so far and just enjoying the journey this story is taking me on. I've even come up with the idea for the next book in the series, which is very dangerous to have plot bunnies just running amok. I did record an episode for the Author's Voice podcast with Doug Lansdale. It was a lot of fun to be interviewed about my life as an author for the show. With the show being an interview format, it was also interesting to see how that works in case I choose to bring a guest on sometime. So we'll see what happens with that. It was a lot of fun. Doug was really great. My episode will air on May 12th on the Author's Voice podcast, and it is available on all podcast platforms. And then the last thing is I've been looking into local book festivals, and I signed up to be an exhibitor at the Collingswood Book Festival in October 7th to be exact. This is a long-running book festival that goes on rain or shine. I've attended it countless times and even exhibited a few times. If you're in the area of South Jersey, mark it on your calendar to attend. It is a great book festival with a wide variety of authors and activities and food. It's a wonderful street festival, and they do move it indoors if it does rain into the local high school. So I do recommend checking out the Collingswood Book Festival on October 7th. So next week's show is going to be on writers' retreats and conferences. So I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here soon. This was The Author's Lighthouse, a Fireball Studio production. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Author's Lighthouse. And if you like the show, leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform. It really helps get the show discovered. And also don't forget to subscribe. If you have a topic you would like to suggest for a future episode, email it to Karen@theauthorslighthouse.com. If you liked this episode and want to hear more, please support the show at patreon.com/authorslighthouse. That's patreon.com/authorslighthouse. Every bit helps support the show. This was The Author's Lighthouse, a Fireball Studio production. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Author's Lighthouse and on Twitter at AuthorsLH. And if you like the show, subscribe and leave us 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps get the show discovered. If you have a topic you would like to suggest for a future episode, email it to Karen@theauthorslighthouse.com. That's KAREN @theauthorslighthouse.com. And if you really like this story and want to help more, please support the show at patreon.com/authorslighthouse. That's patreon.com/authorslighthouse. Every little bit helps support the show, and thank you.